Hello everybody, my name is Robert Crocker. I'm speaking to you from Adelaide in South Australia. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my new book and a little bit about my research. My new book is called Somebody Else's Problem, Consumerism, Sustainability and Design, and it's being released by Greenleaf UK in November this year. So it's been a fair while coming, but the main argument, the main point I try and make is that consumerism is the main engine of our environmental crisis, and that we need to take it very, very seriously. That it's not enough to rely on technology alone. It's not enough to rely on listening to scientists and economists talk about macroeconomic changes. We need to start addressing the consumption problem and the waste problem and the pollution problem that is connected to it. At the moment, we're generating between 7 and 10 billion tons of waste a year in our cities. Within 20 years, this will double. This is an unimaginable figure, an unimaginable volume. At the moment, we're degrading our environment and using our resources at a rate which is completely unsustainable. Dematerializing this through technology is very welcome, but all the evidence suggests that dematerialization, which the eco-modernists talk about as being possible, is usually offset by people spending money and doing things elsewhere that generate waste and generate emissions. And you can see this with examples like music. So even though we have dematerialized music, we still need giant servers to hold the music on. Many of these are powered by dirty coal-fired power stations. So my main argument is that consumerism is the most serious problem because it is the engine underlying the high carbon systems that produce climate change, and we need to take this very, very seriously. So in my book I look at some historical themes first, the background to this. It's called From Consumption to Consumerism, and it really deals with some of the major themes in this. It's not a comprehensive book, it's quite a short book. It deals with some of the main themes in this historical development up to the 1950s, when the great acceleration in emissions really starts. And the second part looks at what are the common accelerators of today's consumerism, including such things as social competition, intensified social competition and comparison, and new technology, and also the perversion of nature into a kind of a resource, an endless resource of treasure which science is going to release for our use and our benefit, which is again a rather interesting sort of sideline here, but very important one. And then the third part, I try to look at ways that particularly designers can get involved in shifting behavior and changing values in how things are made, designed, made and sold. And I actually don't think we can have sustainable design without having sustainable marketing and sustainable advertising, because we're all in this together. For many, many years now we've been promoting and trying to encourage people to buy more things. The whole focus has been on substitution, on making things that are rapidly upgradable. So for example, when Apple released their new iPhone in 2010, There were 1.5 million sold in the first day. 75% went to people who already owned iPhones, presumably most of them working. So this indicates to us that we're incredibly wasteful in our consumption habits. And this has been encouraged by industry because they are focused, what I call, on post-cautionary design and production. This means that they're focused on the contract, on the transaction, the moment when we exchange money, and they're willing to some extent to guarantee something for a year or two, but their whole business model is based on that first phase, because after that their responsibilities decline. My view is that we need to look at products over the longer term, and we need to look at things not just in terms of the transaction, but in terms of its influences over the whole of its life, its origins, and its afterlife. So this mobile phone, for example, will tell me everything. Tell me what's going on anywhere in the world, tell me what the weather is, which at the moment is pretty wild outside. It's a very useful device. I can talk to my children, my friends, everyone with it. But it won't tell me where it came from. It won't tell me anything about its parts, their effects, their toxicity, if you like, nor will it tell me even how to dispose of it properly. It won't even tell me what happens to it later. So it's this knowledge machine which has been deliberately disabled so that I can't find out about it itself. And this goes for all our products. They're all post-cautionary products. They're all really intended for us to buy and to have a brief relationship with, a one-night stand, and then bye-bye, see you later. Whereas if we're going to continue living in this world, we're going to have to find a way of living with our things that is more long-lasting. And so in my book there's about 4 interlocking themes which I touch upon, where I try and expand on this argument. So the first one is I'm against trying to individualize the problem. I think we've wasted a huge amount of time and energy making people feel guilty, making them feel that they're responsible personally for all this, and to some extent you can say they are, in that their consumption is responsible, but it's responsible in the aggregate. It's like blaming a cell for a disease in a body. It's an impossible task even to understand one's own role. I have friends who are very, very green. I'm pretty green myself in my behaviour, but my footprint, even if I do very extreme things, unless I actually go off grid and I grow all my own food and I do all that, will be very similar to my neighbours, simply because we share certain services, we share sewage, water supply, electricity provision, we share things like garbage collection, we shop in the same shops, and we all use a similar transport system. I cycle everywhere usually, except when it's pouring with rain. And so I probably spend much less money on a lot of the high carbon things some of my neighbours do, but it's very unlikely that my footprint would be 10%, more than 10% less than theirs, simply because we're in this together. We're all in this together. So blaming them for the occasional indulgence is ethically wrong and wholly misguided, and won't change them at all. It just makes them angry and resentful. So why we need to look more closely at the systems is that these systems are responsible for probably 90% of climate change. Things like electricity provision, cars, 20% around cars, something like that. If we take manufacturing into account, more. You know, and then we have to look at the resources. So other people with more skills have gone into this in great depth. The issue really is that these systems involve vast sunk costs. We've put billions into our road system, for example. Billions. All over the world, from the 50s onwards, we've built marvellous infrastructures of highways. We've trained police, we've trained traffic engineers to look after these things. We've got this amazing system. But it has a price, an environmental price, and it's a very, very high one. And we have to change this system. Telling people not to drive won't work unless we we create alternative systems. And getting people to shift from one system to another involves them persuading them that their commitment to that system, the sunk cost effect of that system has to change. And that's very, very hard. People, for example, if you're a plumber in Australia, you need a van, your wife and family probably needs a car, you've probably got 2 cars in your driveway, and you've got a van, and you're totally dependent on your van for your work. Now, I'm going to go and tell this guy to go green, you know, to be the green plumber. Okay, he might get an electric van, you know, lash out and spend a huge amount of money in an area which is only just experimentally starting. You can see the problem with individualization. It just doesn't work, and it hasn't worked for a long time. So we've got to put it to rest and try and find another way. Yeah. The second thing I want to point out is that waste making is incredibly important in consumerism. You know, I recently put on an exhibition of photographs of waste from around the world, and there was a seminar which went with it called The Futures of Waste. I hope you can hear me all right. There's a huge rainstorm happening outside. Again, a sign of climate change. It's very unusual, this extreme weather we're having at the moment here. So waste making is phenomenal. When I was in this gallery, I looked at all these fantastic photographs, about 30 of them from around the world. Some of them really top photographers, you know, some of them heartbreaking. You know, children in Ghana dragging buckets of e-waste, their hands blackened by the fumes, poisonous fumes of burning the plastic to extract the metals. You know, I was looking at all these photos, and there was this blue in all of them, and like a sort of almost like a unifying thematic color all in all these pictures. And guess what it was? Plastic. So some of the photos were of plankton glowing with microplastics. Some of them were of dead birds from the Midway with blue plastic in their stomachs, having been fed this by their mothers in mistake for something else. Mountains of waste in India, blue, yeah, because blue is one of the most common colors of plastics. 8 million tons a year escape into the ocean, and then on top of that there's the microplastics we can't see. Waste is really pollution. We have to be honest about it. If it's really small, we call it pollution. When we can see it, we call it waste. But it's the same thing, and it's from our lifestyles, the way we live, the way we work, and the consumption of the goods we produce, the post-cautionary goods we produce. So there's 2 issues here. One is changing those systems to precautionary ones where we look at the influences of what we produce, the later life, the afterlife, the sideways influences of what we produce. And the second one is starting to treat people better as consumers, treating them with more dignity. Instead of saying that there's something wrong with them, if you know the girls are too fat, the boys aren't handsome enough, or whatever, we have to actually treat people as they are and accept them as they are, and give them products that will be their companions rather than they're overnight sensations, and we have to sort of moderate our deception. And this is another theme that I talk a lot about in the book, deception. You know, as I was saying with this mobile phone, I can't tell where it's come from or where it's going, because nobody wants me to find out. Nobody wants me to know the terrible conditions in Apple's factories. Nobody wants me to know the terrible conditions of those who break up these things at the end of their lives. Apple, I'm sure, is doing their best. But what I'm saying is that a change like this, a transition like this, will take time. It's a bit like a 1938 moment. You know, we all think that we can get on with nice Mr. Hitler. Yeah, this is what happened in Britain. The Prime Minister went and had a chat with Mr. Hitler and came back waving a piece of paper saying, you know, peace in our time. The next year, war was declared. The rest is history. We're in a very similar position. We really think that we can continue doing what we're doing now, producing the stuff that we produce, and somehow science, technology will save us. Yeah? It won't. We have to change the routines, the practices, the daily life built around overconsumption. And this will involve some fairly radical changes. And my advice in this book is not to give you some magic bullet, some instant way out of the mess, but to say we need to work together. And so there's a tremendous emphasis on two things at the end of the book. One is on values, changing how values are constructed through media, particularly through persuasion, because we have this huge system of persuasion which drives us to make us feel inadequate, so we'll go out and buy stuff. And the second one is co-production, co-creation. We need to actually work together, and designers need to work with others. So for example, if you're designing a toothbrush, the last thing you need now is to go and talk to other people who've designed similar things. You need to talk to ecologists, you need to talk to marine biologists, all the people who have real problems with plastics, you know, and you need to talk to people in India who use neem tree to brush their teeth, you know, alternatives to the modern toothbrush. How can we design a better toothbrush? It's not an easy thing. It's not a matter of, you know, in our present system, you know, which highlights competition, highlights individualism, highlights the great entrepreneur like Donald Trump. You know, that system is supposed to come up with a solution, but we can see the solutions around us. The dead solutions are everywhere, and it's a disaster. Co-creation, on the other hand, says nobody has a monopoly of answers. Co-creation says we need to work together incrementally towards the goal of sustainability. And that's why in this book I place great emphasis on this. In terms of our toothbrush, we might have a completely different solution if we get the right people together. If we do the Californian thing, some guy will go on holiday to India, discover the Indians using the neem tree to clean their teeth, and twigs from the neem tree, he'll go back with neem oil, he'll patent it, he'll take it in a corner, make lots of money out of it in the health food shops, become a neem millionaire. He'll go on TED Talks, he'll tell everyone how fantastic everything is and how we can change the world. Your idea can change the world in all this stuff. But in the meantime, other guys are going to keep pumping out plastic toothbrushes. Yeah. So TED Talks aren't enough. Yeah. So thank you very much, and please buy my book.